The first blush of morning spread over the glassy expanse of Denver International Airport, the kind of light that makes metal gleam and turns even hurried travelers into silhouettes of calm against a golden backdrop. But inside the terminal was a mosaic of movement-rolling luggage wheels clicking across tile, coffee machines hissing as they dispensed steaming drinks into paper cups, boarding announcements blending into the low hum of conversation. At gate C-28, Flight 623 to Miami was printed in bold green letters on the departure screen. A small crowd gathered near the boarding area, each person in their own bubble of anticipation or routine. A young mother soothed a fussy toddler in a stroller. A sharply dressed man in a navy suit spoke briskly into his phone, pacing in tight circles. Two college students wearing matching university hoodies snapped a selfie in front of the window, the nose of the waiting aircraft photobombing them through the glass. Standing slightly apart from the crowd was Emily Carter, 15 years old, with her backpack slung over one shoulder and a paperback novel clutched in her hand. She wore jeans and a soft gray hoodie with a faded patch from an aviation museum. Stitched on the sleeve a gift from her uncle, who had introduced her to the cockpit of a Cessna 172 just months ago. That summer, she had learned how to hold a yoke steady, keep an eye on the altimeter, and make smooth turns in the sky. It wasn't much she knew, but it had left her with a quiet confidence in her ability to understand the basics of flying. Beside her stood her mother, a woman with warm brown eyes and the same chestnut hair, though streaked with early silver. She held a boarding pass in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through an email from work. Every few minutes she glanced at Emily, her expression softening. "You've been smiling since we left home," she said with a teasing lilt. Emily grinned. "I can't help it. Dad said we might go out on the water the first day." Her father, a marine biologist based in Miami, had promised to show her a pod of dolphins he'd been tracking for weeks. Ever since her parents divorced, visits like this had been rare but precious. She'd been counting down the days on her phone calendar, watching the numbers shrink with the same excitement some kids saved for birthdays. The gate agent's voice came through the PA system. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll begin boarding Flight 623 with our first class passengers and those needing extra time." Emily and her mother were in Group 3. They stepped aside as the first wave of passengers moved forward, boarding passes scanned with cheerful beeps. Emily turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. The aircraft, a Boeing 737-800, stood ready on the tarmac, sunlight dancing across its fuselage. Ground crew members swarmed around it, wheeling luggage carts, connecting fuel hoses, and securing the catering truck's lift. A bright orange cone marked the spot where the nose gear rested. Emily's eyes followed a maintenance worker in a reflective vest as he walked beneath one of the engines, checking panels. Her uncle's voice floated back to her memory. "Always respect the machine. Airplanes don't forgive carelessness." When Group 3 was called, she and her mother filed into the line. Their boarding passes were scanned, and they stepped onto the jet bridge, the temperature shifting subtly from cool terminal air to the warm, slightly metallic atmosphere closer to the aircraft. Inside the cabin, a smiling flight attendant greeted them. "Good morning. Seats 14A and 14B, just to your left." Emily moved down the aisle, eyes darting across the rows. A boy about her age sat with headphones already on, tapping at a handheld gaming console. An elderly couple argued quietly over who had the window seat. Emily slid into 14A, tucking her backpack under the seat in front of her, and fastened her seatbelt. Her mother took the aisle seat, while the middle seat was filled by a kindly man with graying hair and a stack of crossword puzzle books. From her vantage point, Emily could see the edge of the runway, the sweep of taxiways, and the jagged peaks of the Rockies in the distance. a baggage cart rumbled by. The faint, sharp smell of jet fuel filtered into the cabin, and Emily inhaled deeply. It was, to her, the scent of possibilities. The captain's voice came over the intercom, deep and assured. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Reynolds speaking, with First Officer Harding up front. We'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 623, non-stop service to Miami. We're expecting a smooth ride, with some light turbulence as we pass over the Midwest. Cruising altitude will be 33,000 feet, and our flight time is estimated at 3 hours and 25 minutes. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the journey." There was something about his voice that instantly settled nerves, even though Emily had none to begin with. She imagined him and the first officer in the cockpit, hands moving confidently over illuminated controls, flipping switches, running through checklists. The flight attendants moved through the aisle, demonstrating safety procedures. Emily followed along, watching the oxygen mask demonstration and noting the location of the emergency exits. Her mother smirked. "You're probably the only person on this plane actually watching." Emily shrugged. Better safe than sorry. The aircraft door closed with a firm click, and the hydraulic hiss of the jet bridge retracting signaled their isolation from the terminal. The pushback tug engaged, rolling the aircraft slowly backward from the gate. Emily felt the subtle change beneath her feet as the engine's low hum deepened into a steady rumble. They taxied toward the runway, passing other planes waiting their turn. The morning sun struck the wing at just the right angle, making it gleam. Emily leaned closer to the window, catching glimpses of airport workers waving or guiding vehicles between the lanes of tarmac. At the threshold of the runway, there was a brief pause, as though the plane itself were taking a breath. Then the engines roared to life, pressing Emily into her seat. The acceleration was exhilarating, the rumble underfoot, the vibration through the armrest, the narrowing of the runway as they surged forward. She felt the moment the wheels left the ground, a subtle lift that made her heart flutter. The city of Denver spread out below, shrinking with every passing second. Roads became thin gray lines, cars near specks of light. A patchwork of fields and rivers unfolded like a quilt beneath them. They broke through the thin layer of clouds, emerging into a vast expanse of brilliant blue sky. The sun blazed overhead, and the cabin filled with a warm, golden glow. Passengers began to relax, some pulling out books, others drifting off to sleep. A flight attendant wheeled the beverage cart down the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. Emily chose ginger ale, sipping it slowly as she pressed her forehead to the cool glass. She thought about Miami, the salty air, the way her father's smile deepened when he saw her, the promise of dolphins leaping beside the boat. She was so lost in the image that she barely noticed the subtle chime overhead, signaling the fasten seatbelt sign remaining on. But it didn't matter. For now, everything felt right. The engines purred, the sky stretched endlessly ahead, and Emily Carter was just another passenger on Flight 623. She had no way of knowing that before they reached cruising altitude. The calm would shatter in a way she could never have imagined. The climb out of Denver had been smooth. The Boeing 737-800 glided steadily through a bright mid-morning sky, its engines humming with mechanical precision. Emily Carter sat back in her seat, her ginger ale resting on the lowered tray table, the condensation forming a small ring on the plastic. Beside her, her mother had pulled out a magazine, flipping lazily through its pages. The man in the middle seat, Mr. Crosswords, had already filled in half of his first puzzle. At around the 27,000-foot mark, Emily noticed the fasten seatbelt sign had stayed lit longer than usual. Normally, at this stage, the captain would chime in to tell everyone they were reaching cruising altitude, maybe give an update about the weather over Kansas. But this time, the chime never came. Instead, A faint metallic tongue began to drift through the cabin. At first, Emily thought it was just the lingering scent of the coffee pot from the galley, but then it grew sharper, almost like the inside of a coin jar. She wrinkled her nose and glanced toward the front of the plane. A cockpit door was cracked slightly open. She knew it was supposed to stay locked during flight, but sometimes she'd seen it open briefly when a crew member went in or out. Now, the opening was just enough to glimpse a sliver of glowing instruments and the vague shadow of movement inside. Then it happened. The cockpit door swung wider for just a second, enough for the first officer to stumble out. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused. He took 2 unsteady steps into the aisle, his right hand gripping the doorframe. Passengers turned, startled, thinking he might be ill. Then his knees buckled, and he crumpled onto the carpet. The flight attendant nearest to him, Kayla, a petite woman with auburn hair, rushed forward, kneeling beside him. "Sir, sir, can you hear me?" Her voice was tight, professional, but there was an undercurrent of alarm. She tapped his shoulder, then gently rolled him onto his back. Gasps rippled through the rows. A man in the second row stood halfway up. "Is he breathing?" Kayla nodded quickly. "He's breathing, but I need space." She reached for the intercom clipped to her belt and said something that Emily couldn't quite hear over the rising chatter. The metallic smell grew stronger. Emily's stomach tightened. Her summer flying lessons had included talk about oxygen systems, and she remembered her uncle's warnings about hypoxia, how it crept up without warning in high-altitude flying. The overhead speakers crackled, and for a moment, the captain's voice cut in. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your..." It stopped abruptly, replaced by dead air. The silence felt heavier than the words would have been. Emily turned to her mother. "Something's wrong." Her mother glanced toward the front, trying to keep her tone even. "Maybe the co-pilot fainted. I'm sure they've got it under control." But Emily wasn't sure. Up ahead, Kayla rose and hurried to the cockpit door. She knocked, then banged harder. "Captain, are you okay?" No answer. The plane gave a slight lurch to the left. Drinks trembled in cups, and a few passengers grabbed their armrests instinctively. The second flight attendant, Mark, tall and broad-shouldered, appeared from the rear galley, his brow furrowed. "What's going on?" Kayla glanced back, her face pale. "I can't get the captain to respond." Emily strained to see, but the angle from her seat made it impossible. Her heart thudded in her chest. She knew that if both pilots were incapacitated at this altitude, it wasn't just unusual, it was dangerous. A soft ding overhead signaled the automatic release of oxygen masks. The yellow cups dropped from the panels above, dangling at the ends of their tubes. The cabin filled with startled gasps and the sound of elastic straps snapping into place as people fumbled to put them on. Emily's instincts kicked in. She yanked her own mask down, tugging the strap tight, and quickly helped her mother secure hers. A man across the aisle was struggling with his. The elastic twisted. Emily reached over and untangled it before slipping it over his head. He gave her a quick nod of thanks, the mask muffling his voice. The flight attendants moved quickly, urging passengers to stay seated and breathe normally. But there was nothing normal about the way the plane's nose seemed to dip ever so slightly, or how the sound of the engines wavered. Emily's mind raced. She thought about the oxygen system in small planes. How above 10,000 feet without supplemental oxygen? The brain started losing function. On a jet at 27,000 feet, the effects could happen frighteningly fast. Her eyes drifted back to the front. The cockpit door was now completely closed, but no one was at the controls, at least, no one conscious. She imagined the plane up there on autopilot, climbing, drifting, the computer handling the basics while alarms went unanswered. Kayla reappeared, moving quickly down the aisle toward the rear. Emily caught a glimpse of her face, tight-lipped, focused, but with fear flickering behind her eyes. She was going to get the emergency medical kit, Emily guessed, or perhaps check if anyone on board was a doctor. Mark stayed near the cockpit door, his hand hovering near the emergency key panel. Emily saw him glance down the rows, as if calculating whether any passenger could possibly help. She felt her chest tighten, not from lack of oxygen, but from the sudden realization that she might be one of the only people here with even basic flying knowledge. It was a ridiculous thought. She was just a kid. She'd flown a Cessna for maybe an hour at a time, with her uncle always in the seat beside her. She didn't know how to operate a Boeing 737. She didn't even know where all the controls were. But she did know one thing. An aircraft without a conscious pilot at this altitude was a disaster waiting to happen. A child 2 rows back began crying, her voice muffled behind the mask. Her mother tried to soothe her, rocking gently in her seat. The plane jolted again, harder this time, enough to cause a few startled shouts. Emily's drink tipped, spilling ginger ale onto her jeans. She didn't even notice the cold seeping into the fabric. Her gaze locked on the front of the aircraft. The hum of the engines was steady, but there was a subtle drift in their direction. A slow, almost imperceptible yaw that her uncle had once told her to watch for in crosswinds. Emily's pulse quickened. Her fingers curled into her palms. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want the responsibility. But she also knew she might not have a choice. The realization settled over her like a weight. If someone didn't act soon, Flight 623's story could end in the next 20 minutes. The sharp knock on the cockpit door echoed through the narrow aisle, loud enough to turn heads. "Captain? First officer? Are you all right?" The flight attendant's voice carried a note of urgency that instantly made passengers exchange uneasy glances. The only answer was the steady hum of the engines and the faint rattle of trays in the galley. Inside her seat in 14A, Emily's pulse quickened. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Air travel was supposed to be routine. Pilots didn't just ignore crew members mid-flight. A second flight attendant joined the first, pounding harder this time, her knuckles turning white against the reinforced door. The aircraft gave a subtle but unsettling lurch to the right. Overhead bins creaked. A toddler began to cry somewhere near row 22. "It's just turbulence," a businessman muttered aloud, as if reassuring himself. But Emily knew turbulence didn't cause the pilots to go silent. The lead flight attendant turned, scanning the cabin. Her professional smile was gone, replaced by tight, focused eyes. She leaned toward her colleague and whispered, though her voice carried enough for Emily to catch. No response from either of them. A murmur rippled through the rows. Like an invisible wave, people sat up straighter. A man in a baseball cap craned his neck toward the front. Somewhere behind Emily, a woman prayed quietly in Spanish. Then the oxygen masks dropped. The yellow cups swung wildly from their compartments, dangling like eerie marionettes in the cabin air. Gasps erupted. A few passengers screamed outright. Training videos always made it seem simple. Secure your mask, breathe normally. But in real life, with your heart hammering and your brain screaming, this is not normal. It was chaos. Emily's hands moved instinctively. She pulled her mask toward her face, tugged the elastic over her head, and secured it in place. Beside her, her mother fumbled, her hands shaking so badly that the mask kept slipping from her grasp. Emily reached over, holding it steady until her mother's breathing steadied. Through the mask, Emily inhaled sharply. The air tasted metallic, almost cold. A memory flashed her uncle, explaining the dangers of hypoxia during one of their flying lessons. At high altitudes, without oxygen, you'll be out in minutes. The scary part is, You won't even realize it's happening. At the front of the plane, the lead attendant grabbed the intercom. Her voice was calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your oxygen masks secured. We are experiencing a technical difficulty and are working to resolve it." The plane jolted again, sharper this time. Emily could feel the difference. This wasn't turbulence from weather. It was drift directional loss. Someone wasn't at the controls. The second attendant returned from the cockpit door, shaking. Her head, still nothing. She mouthed grimly. The lead attendant's jaw clenched. From the row across, a man mid-40s, wearing a leather jacket, spoke up. "Do you need help? I've flown before." His tone carried confidence, but when the attendant asked, "Commercial?" he hesitated. "No, just simulators." "And some Cessna time." The lead attendant bit her lip. "We'll see if anyone else can." Her voice trailed as she looked down the aisle, scanning each passenger as if willing a licensed pilot to materialize. No one moved. Emily felt her chest tighten, not from the altitude, but from the dawning realization that this plane was flying without conscious pilots. The cockpit was silent, sealed, and now entirely dependent on whatever plan the cabin crew could manage. Her mind replayed every lesson from the airfield with her uncle. How to check altitude, adjust heading, maintain straight and level flight. How to descend safely without overloading the engines. But those were in a small, forgiving Cessna at 5,000 feet, not a massive commercial jet in the thin air of 27,000. The captain's voice had cracked over the PA before fading. The co-pilot had stumbled into the aisle, both now unresponsive. That smell earlier, the faint metallic tang, could have been a leak. Carbon monoxide? Loss of cabin pressure? Either could have taken them out in minutes. The intercom clicked again. "If there is anyone on board with formal flight training, please come to the front immediately." The attendant's voice rang, louder now. The tension in her tone was impossible to mask. Silence followed. No hands went up. No one unbuckled their seatbelt. A woman near the back began to sob. The man in the leather jacket shrank into his seat. Emily's heart hammered louder in her ears than the engine noise. The lead attendant turned to her colleague. "We have to get someone in that cockpit." Her eyes darted to the now slightly ajar door opened earlier when a drink cart had passed, but shut again. A key card was required for entry, and only the crew had access. In the middle of the chaos, Emily felt a strange pull in her chest, a mix of fear and an almost irrational thought. I could try, but she shoved it down. She was just a kid, a sophomore in high school. Someone else, an adult, had to step forward. The attendant glanced back at the passengers one last time, then disappeared into the galley. Seconds later, a sharp beep signaled the cockpit door, unlocking. She stepped inside, and for a brief moment, Emily saw past her shoulder the dim light of the control panel, and two motionless figures slumped forward in their seats. The door shut again, sealing away whatever grim reality lay inside. Emily's throat tightened. She didn't know if they were alive. She didn't know if anyone else on board could fly. And as the plane drifted slightly once more, tilting with no visible correction, she did know one thing: time was running out. The cabin had slipped into a tense, suffocating silence, broken only by the muffled hiss of oxygen flowing through masks. A child whimpered somewhere in the back, his voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. A flight attendant named. Marissa gripped the back of seat 12B, her knuckles pale, eyes darting to the cockpit door as if willing it to open. It didn't. The pilots were still inside, still unresponsive. Emily Carter sat motionless in 14A, her hands resting in her lap. She could feel her pulse hammering in her fingertips. She had never been in a situation like this. No one had. She tried to focus on her breathing, but the reality of what was happening was pressing down hard, The pilots were unconscious. The plane was still in the air, and there was no one flying it. Her mother, Claire, was fumbling with her mask again, trying to make it sit comfortably over her face. "Emily," she said through the rubbery cup, "what's going on? Why aren't we hearing from the captain?" There was no answer that Emily could give without terrifying her. Marissa approached with urgent steps. She crouched next to Emily's seat and pulled down her own mask for a moment. "You," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you know anything about flying?" The question hit Emily like a splash of cold water. "Me?" she said, almost laughing in disbelief. I've flown small planes, Cessnas, with my uncle." But she cut herself off. The image of her uncle, Jim Carter, came to her, sitting beside her in a little cockpit over Kansas farmland, guiding her hands on the yoke, saying, "It's just like riding a bike, you never forget." But that had been a two-seater trainer, not a commercial jet full of passengers. Marissa's eyes sharpened. That's more than anyone else here knows. She didn't wait for Emily's agreement. Her hand closed around Emily's wrist, tugging her out of her seat. Claire reached for her. "Wait, what are you doing?" Marissa looked her in the eyes. "Your daughter might be the only one who can keep us alive." Then she was pulling Emily down the aisle, the eyes of dozens of passengers following, some wide with hope, others with barely concealed fear. The closer they got to the cockpit, the more Emily's mind screamed at her to stop. The thought of being in that seat, the one she had only ever seen in movies, was overwhelming. Her legs felt heavy, as if the floor were trying to hold her down. But Marissa kept urging her forward. The cockpit door loomed ahead, slightly ajar from when the co-pilot had stumbled out earlier. Marissa pushed it open with her shoulder. The sight inside knocked the breath out of Emily. Both pilots sat slumped forward in their seats, straps cutting diagonally across their bodies. The captain's head rested against the control panel, his cheek pressed to a cluster of illuminated switches. The co-pilot's chin was against his chest, his hands still loosely holding the yoke. The air smelled faintly metallic and strangely sterile, like heated electronics mixed with something sharper ozone, maybe. Everywhere Emily looked, there were blinking lights, flashing warnings, and unfamiliar instruments. The panel stretched, wider than her entire arm span, crowded with knobs, dials, switches, and screens filled with numbers she didn't understand. The autopilot was on, but a warning tone pulsed steadily, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. She hovered in the doorway, frozen. I can't do this," she whispered. Marissa's voice softened, but it carried a desperate edge. "Emily, if you don't sit down, no one else will. You said you've flown before your hands know what to do." Emily took a small step forward. Her eyes darted to the pilots again. Both were breathing shallow, but steady. That was something. But they were completely out of it. She slid into the captain's seat, the leather worn smooth under her palms. Her feet barely reached the pedals. The sheer number of controls was dizzying, and the low hum of the instruments filled the space like a constant, unnerving reminder of the stakes. Her hands hovered over the yoke. Her uncle's voice came back again. "A plane is still a plane, big or small. The principles are the same." She gripped it, feeling the subtle resistance. The aircraft shivered under her touch, like a living thing. Marissa leaned in and pointed to the headset hanging beside the seat. "Put that on. The tower's been trying to reach us." Emily slipped it over her head. The foam ear cup sealed her into another world where a calm, clipped voice was repeating, "Flight 623, do you copy?" "Flight 623, this is Denver Center. Please respond." She pressed the mic button, her voice trembling. "This is Emily Carter. The pilots are unconscious. I've had some flight training, but I've never flown anything this big." There was a brief silence, then the voice returned, steady and reassuring. "Emily, my name is David. I'm an air traffic controller. You're going to do exactly what I tell you, and we're going to get everyone home safe. Can you tell me your current altitude?" Emily scanned the panel. Too many numbers. Then she spotted at 27,000 feet. 27,000. David's voice came back, calm but urgent. "Copy that. Oxygen deprivation can hit fast at this altitude. We need to get you down to 10,000 feet immediately. Don't touch the autopilot, yet just confirm." "It's engaged." Her eyes found the switch labeled AP. The light was on. "It's on." "Good," David said. "Now, I want you to get familiar with your controls. That yoke is going to feel heavier than the Cessna. Your pedals will respond slower. You're in a Boeing 737. She's big, but she'll listen if you're smooth." Emily swallowed hard. The words were supposed to reassure her, but the mention of Boeing 737 only reminded her how enormous this machine was compared to what she knew. She glanced out the front windows. The sky stretched in every direction, the horizon a perfect curve. The ground was impossibly far away. Her stomach tightened. This wasn't a video game. This wasn't practice. If she made a mistake, 178 people could die. David's voice cut in again, clear and confident. "Emily, I want you to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. We have time. You're not alone." Her grip loosened slightly. She took a breath. The seat felt less like a trap and more like a command post. Marissa stepped back toward the cabin, but kept a hand on the doorframe. "I'll keep the passengers calm. You've got this." Her voice was steadier than it had been earlier, but her eyes still carried the weight of everything riding on Emily. Emily turned back to the panel. The yoke, the endless sky ahead. Her fear was still there. How could it not be? But underneath, something else stirred. Focus. She knew the basics. She knew how to keep an aircraft level, how to watch the instruments, how to listen to guidance. The rest she would have to learn in the next few minutes. David's next words came through the headset. "All right, Emily, let's get to work." Emily's hands shook as she eased herself into the captain's seat. The cockpit smelled faintly metallic, and the air felt heavy, stale, and strangely warm. Two men once confident and commanding were now slumped lifelessly over their controls. The captain's cap had fallen to the floor, and his headset dangled uselessly by its cord. The co-pilot's chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths, his face pale and lips slightly blue. Emily swallowed hard. She was just a 15-year-old girl who had only ever handled a Cessna 172 during summer lessons. And now, in front of her, was a Boeing 737 at 27,000 feet. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She could hear passengers murmuring behind the locked cockpit door, their voices muffled but tense. Somewhere back there, her mother sat strapped in her seat. Completely unaware, her daughter had just been placed at the helm of a passenger jet. A flight attendant knelt beside her, voice shaking. "Emily, we're counting on you. Air traffic control is ready to guide you. Just listen to them and do what they say." She nodded, but her mouth was dry, her throat constricted. The attendant handed her the captain's headset. Emily slipped it on, the cushioned ear pads pressing tightly against her head. For a moment, there was only static and faint beeps from the plane's warning systems. Then a calm, steady male voice broke through. "Flight 623. This is Denver Center." "Who am I speaking with?" Emily took a breath. "This is Emily Carter. I'm 15. The pilots are unconscious. And I know how to fly a small plane, but not this one." There was a pause, then the voice returned, more focused now. "Okay, Emily, we've got you. First, take a deep breath. This plane can fly itself for a while, so we're not falling out of the sky. But we need to get you and everyone else down to a safer altitude. Emily gripped the yoke larger and heavier than the one she knew from her Cessna. It felt alive, subtly pushing back against her movements. Her eyes darted over the glowing panels and countless switches. The autopilot light was on, holding there. Heading and speed, but the altitude gauge read a dangerous 27,000 feet. She remembered what her uncle had once told her about hypoxia above certain altitudes. You had only minutes without oxygen before you'd start losing control. Emily, the controller said, check the mask over your face. Is it secure? Yes, she replied quickly, tugging at the straps. It's on. Good. Now, look at the center panel. See the vertical speed indicator? It's a round dial with a needle in the middle. She scanned the cockpit until she found it. Got it. Okay, on my mark, you're going to twist the autopilot knob to start a gentle descent, about 1,000 feet per minute. We want to get below 10,000 feet as soon as possible so everyone can breathe normally. Her hand hovered over the knob. What if I mess it up? You won't, the controller said, his tone firm but kind. You're doing great. Ready? Turn it now slowly. Emily twisted the knob, watching the needle shift. She felt the plane respond, nose dipping slightly. The hum of the engines deepened as they began their controlled drop. A sudden shudder ran through the fuselage, and her grip tightened. Is that normal? Yes, just a little turbulence, the voice assured her. The autopilot is still flying. Just keep monitoring the instruments. Emily's eyes kept jumping to the unconscious pilots. The captain's fingers twitched. Slightly, but neither man woke. She wondered if they would ever open their eyes again. Another flight attendant squeezed through the narrow space, holding a clipboard. Emily, the passengers are stable. Everyone's on oxygen. Just, please, keep us steady. I'm trying, Emily said, forcing her voice to stay even. The controller's voice came again. Emily, I need you to confirm your heading. Look at the compass display. What does it read? She squinted at the digital readout. 175. Perfect. We're lining you up toward a safer airspace. You're doing better than you think. Now, let's run a systems check together. I'll walk you through it. Over the next few minutes, Emily followed a series of precise instructions, reading gauges, confirming fuel levels, checking engine status. The tasks kept her mind from spiraling into panic. Her breathing slowed, her focus sharpening with every command she executed. Emily, the controller said finally, you're flying a passenger jet. That's no small thing. You're a natural pilot. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. Thanks, but I just want to get everyone on the ground. And you will, he said. But first, let's get you down to 15,000 feet. Turn the knob another click. She obeyed, feeling the subtle shift in altitude again. The air seemed slightly cooler, fresher. Somewhere in the back of her mind, Emily realized she'd crossed an invisible threshold. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. She was now actively flying this aircraft, making real decisions that determined the fate of every soul on board. A jolt of turbulence snapped her back to the present. Warning chimes echoed in the cockpit, and a yellow light blinked on the overhead panel. What's that? She asked, alarm rising in her voice. The controller's tone stayed calm. Right engine temperature warning. Could be a false alarm, but let's play it safe. I'll talk you through reducing thrust slightly. Emily's hands moved the throttle levers to black handles that felt solid and stubborn. She eased the right one back just as instructed, watching the engine gauge slowly settle into the safe zone. That's it, the controller said. Crisis averted. She let out a shaky laugh. I think my heart's beating faster than the engines. Good, he replied. That means you're still with me. Stay sharp. We're going to bring you in for landing soon." Emily's gaze swept over the endless clouds below, the horizon stretching far beyond her view. She thought about her father waiting at the Miami airport, completely unaware that his teenage daughter was at the controls of a commercial jet thousands of feet above the earth. She also thought about the responsibility resting on her shoulders. Dozens of passengers, strangers only hours ago, were now depending on her for their very lives. Her uncle's voice echoed in her memory again, calm, steady, confident. A plane is still a plane. Big or small, it listens to the pilot who believes they can fly it. Emily tightened her grip on the yoke. She wasn't just believing now, she was proving it. Emily's hands clutched the yoke like it was the last lifeline between her and a free fall. The headset pressed tight against her ears, carrying a steady but urgent voice from air traffic control. "Emily, this is Captain Reynolds from Miami." "Center," the man said calmly, his tone like an anchor in a storm. "You're doing great. First thing, we need to maintain altitude. What's your current reading?" Emily's eyes darted over the panel, searching for the altimeter. "At 26,800, she stammered. "Good," Reynolds replied. "Now keep it level. Tiny adjustments. Don't fight the plane, just guide it." The vibrations under her feet felt like the heartbeat of a giant. She eased her grip, nudging the yoke back into center. Outside, the endless blue sky seemed peaceful, but she knew the thin air at this height was what had put both pilots down. "Emily," Reynolds continued, "we need to get you into safer air below 12,000 feet. That'll bring oxygen. Levels up in the cabin. Can you locate the throttle levers?" Her gaze found them, two black handles side by side. "Got them," she said. "Good. We're going to reduce power gradually. Not too fast. If we drop too quickly, you'll lose. Control." Her palms were slick with sweat, but she nodded instinctively, even though Reynolds couldn't see her. She pushed the left lever slightly forward, then the right. The change was almost imperceptible, but the nose of the plane began to dip. In the cabin, the shift was felt. Passengers gripped armrests as the engine's pitch lowered. Whispers rippled down the aisles. No one knew a teenager was at the controls, except for the few crew members who'd been in the cockpit with her. "Emily, keep your eyes on the horizon." "Indicator," Reynolds said. "That's your best friend right now. It tells you if you're level. See that little orange line? Keep it centered." She focused on it like her life depended on it, because it did. A flight attendant crouched beside her, keeping her oxygen mask secure. "You're doing amazing," she whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and awe. Emily wanted to believe her, but a glance at the unconscious captain and first officer, slumped in their seats with their masks now secured, reminded her how fragile the situation was. "Okay, Emily," Reynolds said. "You're descending nicely. Let's talk speed. What's your airspeed reading?" She scanned the gauges until she found it. 290 knots. Perfect. Keep it steady as you go down. At 20,000 feet, we'll adjust for approach." Approach? The word hit her like a jolt. Landing was still somewhere ahead, but right now she couldn't even think that far. Suddenly, turbulence hit a sharp jolt that rattled the entire plane. Her heart leapt. "Easy, small corrections," Reynolds guided. "When the plane drops, let it, then guide it back." She followed his instructions, letting the yoke ease forward, then gently pulling back. The sky smoothed out again. "That's it," Reynolds said. "You've got natural hands. Ever think about becoming a pilot?" Emily let out a nervous laugh. "Not like this." The descent continued. 23,000 feet. 21. The air in the cabin grew thicker, and passengers began to look less panicked. A baby started crying, a strange but oddly comforting sign of life returning. Then a new sound pierced the air an alarm chime. "What is that?" she asked, voice cracking. "Don't panic," Reynolds replied quickly. "Check the engine." Warning lights. Her eyes landed on a flashing amber indicator for the right engine. "Talk to me, Emily," Reynolds urged. "Right engine lights blinking," she said. "Copy that. It might just be a pressure fluctuation from the descent. Keep an eye on your gauges. If oil pressure drops below 60, we'll shut it down." "What's it reading now?" she checked. 72. "Good. Leave it alone for now." The minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour. At 18,000 feet, Reynolds' tone shifted slightly more businesslike, more focused. "Emily, from here on, you're flying under instrument rules. That means trust your gauges more than your eyes. The horizon might lie to you when we're close to clouds." Emily's muscles ached from holding position, but she kept her focus. Her breathing matched the rhythm of the engines. 17,000, she reported. "Perfect. At 15,000, we'll start preparing you for a shallow turn toward Miami. We've cleared all other traffic out of your way." Her stomach churned. Turning a small training plane was one thing. Turning a commercial jet full of people was another. "You've got this," Reynolds reassured. "Think of it as steering a big, heavy car. Smooth movements, no jerks." At 15,000, she began the turn, the nose responding slowly but steadily. The distant coastline of Florida appeared through the windshield, a faint smudge of green and gold against the blue. In the cabin, people began craning their necks toward the windows, sensing land ahead. Hope sparked in their eyes. Inside the cockpit, Emily's entire world had narrowed to gauges, levers, and the voice in her ear. She didn't think about what would happen if she failed because she couldn't afford to. "Emily," Reynolds said softly, "you're bringing them home. Just keep going." Emily's hands gripped the yoke with a new sense of resolve. The sprawling coastline of Florida was now clearly visible beneath a blanket of clouds. The Miami airport's runways appeared like ribbons cutting through the land below, a beacon of hope that she clung to with every fiber of her being. Her headset crackled. "Flight 623, this is Captain Reynolds. You're doing outstanding. We're guiding you for the final approach now. Keep steady and focus on the instruments." The cabin was quiet, except for the faint hum of engines and now the occasional murmur from passengers. Emily felt their eyes on her, though she couldn't see them. The weight of their trust was almost tangible. She swallowed hard, reminding herself that hundreds of lives rested on her shoulders. The altitude was down to 12,000 feet, with airspeed carefully maintained at 210 knots. Reynolds' voice guided her gently. "Reduce throttle slightly as you prepare to descend below 10,000 feet. The runway is in sight." Emily's fingers moved to the throttle levers, easing back carefully. The engine's pitch lowered, and the plane began a gentle descent. A wave of nausea rolled through her, but she fought it down, focusing on its instruments and the distant runway markers. Suddenly, a warning light blinked on the panel, a harsh red engine fire indicator for the left engine. Emily froze, eyes wide, heart pounding like a drum. "Emily, listen carefully." Reynolds' voice was calm but urgent. "Engine fire warning. Do you see a fire switch? It's a red handle above your left shoulder." Emily's hand shot up, trembling as she reached for the switch. She pulled it down. A hiss filled the cockpit as the engine shut down. The plane shuddered but remained steady. "Good job. You've just saved us from disaster," Reynolds praised. "Stay focused. One engine can keep us in the air, but we need to land as soon as possible." The plane drifted to one side slightly, the asymmetric thrust demanding correction. Emily adjusted the rudder pedals with her feet, fighting the tug and pulling the nose straight. The runway grew larger in the windshield. Bright lights blinked at its edges, guiding her forward. "Lower the landing gear," Reynolds instructed. Emily pulled the gear lever down. She felt a satisfying click and saw the indicators confirm. The wheels were locked in place. The plane's weight shifted subtly, pressing her back into the seat. The flaps had to be lowered next to slow the plane. Emily moved the flap lever cautiously, watching the indicators. Perfect. "Now, slow to 160 knots, Reynolds directed. Emily eased the throttle back further, feeling the plane respond smoothly. The engines groaned softly, and the plane's descent rate slowed. The runway filled her view, crisp and welcoming. Passengers began murmuring, some gripping hands, others closing eyes in silent prayer. Emily's mouth was dry. Her vision tunneled slightly, but she blinked hard to focus. The yoke felt less like an enemy now, and more like an extension of herself. "Keep your eyes on the glide slope indicator," Reynolds coached. "You want that center light lit as you come in?" Emily adjusted her approach, keeping the plane steady and true. The ground rushed closer. She could see the painted markings on the runway with incredible clarity. "Almost there," Reynolds encouraged. "Ready for touchdown?" Her heart leapt. Yes. Ease back on the yoke as you approach the runway threshold. When you feel the wheels touch, gently pull the yoke back to keep the nose up. Emily followed each instruction to the letter, feeling the plane dip slightly as the wheels kissed the tarmac. A soft jolt vibrated through the cockpit. Brake gently. Reverse thrust when available. Emily pulled the throttle back fully, flipping the reverse thrust levers. The engines roared in reverse, slowing the plane. The runway sped beneath her as the jet came to a safe stop. A cheer erupted through the cabin, muffled through the cockpit door. Emily exhaled, tears stinging. Her eyes. "Emily, you did it," Reynolds said. "You brought us home." Her voice broke as she whispered, "Thank you." The Boeing 737 slowed to a crawl, tires whispering against the concrete of Miami International Airport's main runway. Emily Carter's hands trembled as she released her grip on the yoke, finally allowing herself to lean back. The roar of the sea. Engines settled into silence, replaced by the heavy, collective exhale of hundreds of passengers and crew. Outside, sunlight spilled over the tarmac, warm and reassuring after the tension of hours spent high above the clouds. The emergency vehicles flanked the plane, lights flashing, sirens wailing softly in the background. Paramedics and firefighters swarmed, their faces etched with urgency and relief inside the cockpit. Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding in tears. Brimming in her eyes, it was over. She had done it. The impossible had happened. Marissa, the lead flight attendant, who had pulled Emily to the cockpit earlier, entered quietly, a gentle smile breaking through her exhausted expression. "Emily," she said softly, voice trembling, "you saved us all." Emily looked at her, voice barely a whisper. "I just did what I could, but I never imagined I'd actually fly a plane like this." "Not like this." Marissa shook her head, eyes moist. "No, you did more than that. You kept your head, listened, and fought through fear when most would have frozen." Behind them, the cockpit door opened, and paramedics carefully lifted the captain and first officer onto stretchers. Both men were pale and weak, but alive, breathing steadily as oxygen masks covered their faces. The pilot's incapacitation had turned a routine flight into a nightmare, but Emily's courage had turned it back into a miracle in the cabin. The passengers who had been watching the drama unfold burst into applause and cheers, tears of relief shining in their eyes. Mothers held children close, elderly couples clasped hands, and strangers exchanged knowing smiles, a silent gratitude binding them all. Emily's mother, Claire, was led toward the cockpit, tears streaming as she embraced her daughter tightly. "My brave girl," she whispered, "you were amazing. You saved us." Emily's voice cracked. I was scared. So scared. But I had to keep going. The media descended quickly. Cameras flashed relentlessly as news anchors broadcast live from the runway. A teenage girl, just 15 years old, took control of this jet after both pilots lost consciousness and landed it safely, one reporter announced breathlessly. Her quick thinking and calm nerves saved the lives of 178 people on board. Emily found herself swept into a whirlwind of interviews and news segments. Officials hailed her as a hero. Pilots praised her composure and instincts. Aviation experts marveled at her quick adaptation to flying a complex commercial aircraft. But amidst the praise, Emily remained humble, always emphasizing the support she received. "I never flew alone," she told reporters. The flight attendants, the air traffic controllers, the crew, everyone helped. "I just tried to keep the plane steady and listen." Days later, Emily was invited to meet with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and the airline's leadership. They praised her bravery and offered her an opportunity few teenagers ever receive: access to advanced flight training programs and mentorship from veteran pilots. Her high school made arrangements for her to continue her studies with flexibility so she could pursue aviation full-time. Friends and family threw her a small celebration, proud of how she'd turned an unimaginable crisis into a life-changing moment. In quiet moments, Emily replayed the flight in her mind. The fear, the adrenaline, the way every second felt like a lifetime. She thought about the voices in her headset, especially Captain Reynolds, whose calm guidance had steadied her when panic threatened. Her Uncle Jim, a flight instructor, visited as well, pride shining in his eyes. "You showed a courage I've never seen," he said. "Flying is about trust in the plane, the instruments, and yourself. You earned that trust today." Emily's dreams shifted after the ordeal. Aviation wasn't just a hobby anymore, it was her calling. She enrolled in a local flight school, training hard, absorbing everything. Her story inspired other young people, especially girls, to look up at the sky and imagine themselves at the controls. Letters poured in from around the world: passengers, pilots, students thanking her for her bravery. Some shared their own dreams, sparked by her example. Emily answered as many as she could, grateful that something so frightening could lead to so much hope. The pilots recovered fully and reached out to Emily personally. They called her guardian angel and a natural. The airline awarded her an honorary plaque and promised a lifetime of support. As months passed, Emily grew stronger, more confident. Each flight lesson, each hour logged, was a step closer to becoming the pilot she was meant to be. One evening, standing in her backyard, she gazed at the deepening sky, a canvas painted with fading sunlight and wisps of cloud. The stars blinked. Awake, distant but welcoming. She smiled softly, feeling the quiet pull of the heavens. The sky wasn't just a place to look at, it was her path forward. A place where fear met courage, and where the unexpected could lead to greatness. Emily Carter had taken the controls when no one else could. She had flown through panic, uncertainty, and danger, and emerged a hero. And this was only the beginning.